Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, you're joining us as we explore the long and really fascinating story of France. We're drawing insights from a brief history of France.
That's right.
Think of this as maybe your shortcut to understanding the key moments and, the enduring themes that have shaped this remarkable nation.
French history truly spans millennia. It's vast. So our aim today is to navigate this expansive timeline and really pull out the most pivotal developments. We're kind of on a mission, you could say, to uncover the essential narrative, providing you with a clearer understanding of France's journey through time.
Okay, so where do we begin this journey? We're going way, way back, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Our exploration starts in prehistoric France.
Yeah.
And what's immediately striking is just how deep the human presence goes here.
Right.
We find fossils of early hominids, alongside evidence of the lower Paleolithic Mousterian culture.
So like really early tool-making tradition.
Exactly. Very early.
It's not just basic tools, though. The history mentions they were actually mining flint way back then at places like Le Grand Persigny.
Yeah, that's right. Imagine the ingenuity involved in even that early form of, resource extraction.
Incredible.
Exactly. Then came the Cro-Magnons. They developed more sophisticated toolkits during the Upper Paleolithic in what we call the Argnation and Gravitian industries.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really captivating. The artistic achievements. Specifically, the Cro-Magnons in the Magdalenian period.
Ah, the cave paintings.
Yes. The engravings and the polychrome paintings in caves like Lascaux and Altamira are just breathtaking. They depict hunting animals with incredible skill, showing this profound understanding of the natural world around them.
It really makes you wonder about their beliefs, doesn't it? How they saw themselves, their place in nature.
It absolutely does, that level of artistic expression so long ago.
And then things shifted again with the Neolithic period. What was the defining change then? A big one, I imagine.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
The Neolithic era brought a fundamental transformation. The development of settled agriculture.
Right, farming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
New tools like the plow, the hoe, the stone sickle. They revolutionized how people lived. We also see more complex stonework, things like tombs and early statues.
And connecting this to broader ideas, the source mentions a potential shift in deities towards maybe more feminine figures.
Yes, that's suggested.
Okay.
Perhaps towards a great mother figure, likely associated with fertility and the harvest. It suggests a changing societal focus, tied to their new settled way of life.
Interesting. Almost a shift from that nomadic survival-based existence to something more settled, nurturing, tied to the land itself.
That's a good way to put it.
But all this prehistoric activity supposedly concludes around 1500 BC. That feels like quite a line in the sand.
It does. It's a conventional marker, really, an end to this very early chapter, or the region we now call France, leading us into periods shaped by, completely new forces and influences.
Like the Romans.
Exactly. The next major transformative event is, of course, the Roman conquest.
Ah, Julius Caesar. Always with an eye on his legacy, wasn't he? So his main goal in conquering Gaul was really about boosting his prestige and political standing back in Rome.
Pretty much, yes. It was largely driven by Roman politics. And the Gallic Wars, lasting from 58 to 52 BC, were a significant and often brutal undertaking.
Yeah.
Gaul at that time had a substantial population, estimated somewhere between 10 and 12 million people. So Caesar's campaigns were far from a simple walkover.
The history details some pretty intense conflicts, the annihilation of the Helvetii, the challenge from Ariovistus, and then the resistance of the Belgians. They sound quite formidable, even getting reinforcements from some seriously feared Germanic tribes.
They were indeed. And the Battle of the Sabbaths in 57 BC was a pivotal moment, really showcasing Caesar's military genius, you could say.
How so?
Well, he led around 30,000 Roman troops against a much larger Gallic force, maybe over 60,000. It demonstrated his tactical skill, even when facing a numerically superior enemy in unfamiliar territory.
But the Gallic tribes didn't just roll over, did they? The revolt led by Vercingetorix in 52 BC sounds like a major threat to Roman control.
Oh, absolutely.
The siege of Gergovia was even a rare defeat for Caesar.
Exactly. Vercingetorix's strong leadership and the Gauls' effective use of, guerrilla warfare initially surprised the Romans, even led to setbacks. However, Caesar was adaptable. That was one of his strengths. And this led eventually to the decisive siege of Alesia.
Right. What happened there?
What's fascinating is how Vercingetorix's support ultimately weakened. There were internal disagreements among the Gallic tribes, apparently.
Divisions.
Exactly. That, combined with the disciplined Roman military approach, led to his eventual surrender after a long, difficult siege. 6 weeks, the source mentions.
So Gaul becomes Roman territory. Did the Romans immediately impose their culture and language on everyone, like overnight?
Not entirely, no. Not at the outset. Initially, Gallic communities continued using their own languages, maintaining some traditions. While there was a process of cultural assimilation over time, it wasn't a complete and immediate replacement of existing Gallic culture. It's worth remembering, too, there were even earlier Celtic settlements, dating back to maybe 600 BC.
With the significant cultural center at Brennus' Alesia, apparently.
Yes, that's mentioned.
But the Romans, being the dominant power, eventually wanted to solidify their control. The history mentions temporary chiefdoms, yet the Gauls still tried to resist even after the initial conquest.
That's right. Resistance continued. But Rome's strategy involved dividing the conquered territory into 3 administrative regions, each governed by a Roman official, a viceroy.
Right.
This effectively transformed the existing tribal leaders into vassals of the Roman Empire. They also established Roman colonies, coloniae, granting special civitas privileges to Roman and Greek settlers.
Though not initially to all Gallic cities like Auvergne and Lyon.
Correct. Those privileges weren't universally applied at first.
So how does this Roman conquest connect to the later development of France? It feels like such a distant period.
Well, if we think about the bigger picture, the Roman conquest, despite being, foreign rule, did lay down some foundations. A unified geographical area, for one.
Okay.
More importantly, the history suggests that when a distinct French state eventually emerged centuries later, it would also pursue a degree of uniformity and define its own national culture. In some ways, maybe echoing that Roman approach to governance and assimilation within their vast empire.
That's a really interesting connection. Okay, shifting gears dramatically now from Roman legions to feudal lords. We're entering the Middle Ages.
Yes.
The history identifies the West Frankish kingdom of Charles the Bald as the geographical starting point for modern France.
Yes, and the period following Charles's reign was marked by significant instability. Charlemagne's once vast empire was divided, you see.
Right.
And powerful local lords, these vassals, gained prominence, often rivaling the power of the kings themselves.
So kings like Charles the Bald and his successor, Louis the Stammerer, had limited real power against these lords.
Very limited. Dominant families like the Robertians eventually rose to power, leading to Hugh the Great and his son, Hugh Capet, who established the Capetian dynasty.
But it sounds like Hugh and his early successors weren't exactly in firm control of a unified, strong kingdom. Even the recognition of their kingship by these powerful lords was sometimes hesitant.
Precisely. That's a key point. The early Capetian kings faced 2 primary challenges. First, to regain control and unify the territories held by these powerful barons.
Right, get the land back.
And second, to establish a functioning central government. The history even compares them unfavorably in this respect with the kings of Wessex in Britain, who managed to consolidate central authority much earlier.
So when does the French monarchy actually begin to assert itself more strongly? The election of Hugh Capet in 987 by these great lords sounds more like a strategic move by them than a display of real royal power.
That's a crucial observation, yeah.
He initially only controlled the area around Orléans and a few castles along the Seine River. Not much at all.
Exactly. The real shift began much later with Philip II of Augustus, who reigned from 1180 to 1223.
Okay, Philip Augustus.
He began to build a stronger monarchy, notably by engaging in conflicts with Henry II of England and the Count of Toulouse.
Ah, the English connection.
Yes, this led to the significant weakening of Henry II's extensive territories in France.
Yeah.
The Angevin Empire, as it's sometimes called.
Right, it started crumbling.
And this allowed France to emerge as the strongest power in Europe at the time. Philip gained substantial land, including territories bordering Paris and lands previously held by the Count of Toulouse.
The history mentions an initial setback against the English king, but then subsequent victories. It sounds like Philip II Augustus was a really pivotal figure.
Absolutely critical.
And then we have Philip IV, who really asserted royal authority. That famous statement, "What pleases the prince has the force of law." Pretty direct.
Yes, Philip IV, the Fair, he reigned from 1285 to 1314 and further consolidated royal power. He expanded the royal bureaucracy, importantly relying on talented individuals from the middle class, not just nobles.
Interesting.
And he even convened the Estates General in 1302, though, as the history notes, this assembly didn't gain any real legislative power at that time.
But the French monarchy faced another big challenge after Philip V's death. Think about heirs.
Yes, a succession crisis. The absence of a direct male heir. This led to the formal exclusion of women from inheriting the throne, the Selic law being invoked, and the recognition of Philip of Valois as the new king, starting a new branch of the dynasty.
The history also takes us back briefly to the Carolingian Empire, even though the idea of France was still quite fluid then.
Right, it was more of a geographical term at that point.
It highlights how land was divided among the king, the church, and the nobles, and how early Frankish kingship was more of a military leadership role that gradually evolved into hereditary rule.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the church grew into a really powerful institution alongside this, with its own land holdings and administrative structures. You also saw the development of a landed aristocracy, particularly strong in the south. The later Carolingian emperors faced immense difficulties holding their territories together, invasions, internal conflicts, and the French crown itself lacked significant financial resources. This period really set the stage for the decentralized system of feudalism that followed.
Feudalism, where powerful dukes in regions like Aquitaine, Normandy, Brittany controlled huge amounts of land, often more than the king himself.
That's the picture, yes.
It sounds like the early Capetian kings had a real uphill battle establishing their authority.
They certainly did. But as the history points out, Philip II Augustus gradually expanded the royal domain, particularly through that crucial conquest of Normandy. That was a major turning point in strengthening royal power and moving towards a more unified kingdom.
So the Capetian dynasty, starting with Hugh in 987, despite those initial limitations, they managed to stay in power for a remarkable length of time, all the way until 1792.
Indeed, the sheer longevity is significant, even if their initial power and territory were quite restricted. The history contrasts the relative, poverty and lack of power of the early Capetian kings with the later successes of figures like Philip II Augustus.
Right.
It really emphasizes that initial central problem, overcoming the authority of those powerful, semi-independent local lords who commanded the primary loyalty of the people in their regions.
It touches on key successors like Henry II and Philip II being somewhat overshadowed by the nobility.
Yes,
And then Philip II Augustus making those crucial gains against the English, even effectively dethroning John Lackland and significantly expanding the royal domain.
Huge gains, yes.
Louis IX, or St. Louis, is portrayed as making efforts to build a more sort of civilized and just nation.
Yes, Louis IX's reign is often viewed as a period of significant moral and administrative reform, a consolidating figure.
And then the 14th century marks a high point of Capetian power with rulers like John II and Charles V right in the middle of that long and complex Hundred Years' War.
Exactly, right in the thick of it.
The Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, a series of conflicts with England over the French throne, with its origins tracing way back to the Norman conquest. It sounds like it had a profound and lasting impact on both English and French societies.
Absolutely. Massive impact. The war led to significant changes in the traditional codes of chivalry, the Knight's Code, and even the very concept of kingship evolved.
How so?
It became less solely based on heredity, bloodline, and more linked to political obligations, and crucially, the support of the elites.
Right, practical power.
And the enormous financial costs of mobilizing armies also had a deep impact on French society. It contributed to things like increased plundering, social unrest. The history contrasts how England and France managed their war efforts, highlighting different economic and social consequences in each kingdom. France, for instance, faced greater internal factions and unrest, partly due to how the spoils of war were distributed.
Fascinating. From centuries of conflict to a period of, immense cultural and intellectual flourishing, the Renaissance in France.
A major shift, yes.
The history places its beginnings towards the end of Charles VIII's reign, really gaining momentum under Francois II and Henri II. New ideas in literature, the emergence of the first French salons in the 1550s. It signaled a big cultural change.
And we can't forget Michel de Montaigne and his groundbreaking essay, a completely new form of writing, personal, conversational in tone. The latter half of the 16th century really belonged to him in many ways in terms of literary innovation.
The reign of Francois really seems to be the pinnacle of the French Renaissance, doesn't it? He actively brought Italian artists like Leonardo da Vinci to France.
He did, and the network of patrons around the king, including influential figures like Chancellor Dupré and Madame d'Etampes, played a vital role in supporting the arts. We also see the development of professional literature on architecture, and talented French architects emerged who skillfully combined classical styles with a distinctly French sense of, comfort and practicality in their designs. Think architects like Pierre Lescot, Philibert Delorme, Jean Boulan.
The history mentions how the artistic style of Mannerism spread through engravings by Jacques-André de Cerceau, and the impressive work of French Renaissance sculptors like Jean Goujon and Germain Pilon, particularly known for their elaborate tombs.
Beautiful work, yes.
However, French artistic production then experienced a decline after the death of Henri II because of the wars and unrest.
Exactly. The religious wars really put a damper on things. It wasn't until the relative peace brought by the Edict of Nantes and the subsequent reign of Henri IV that the arts began to revive and flourish once more.
So the Renaissance was truly a period of remarkable cultural blossoming in France, marked by new institutions of learning and this growing emphasis on reason and direct observation of the world.
That's a good summary. The rediscovery of classical literature had a profound impact, influencing iconic writers like François Villon and François Rabelais.
And the influence of Italian painting came through François Sareste's political alliances, along with contributions from Flemish artists.
The history highlights the artistic theories of Joachim du Bellay, who advocated imitating the great Italian masters Raphael, Michelangelo, Titian.
Right.
French sculptors like Goujon even traveled to Rome for training. And François Lecerf's ambitious building projects, most notably the chateau at Fontainebleau, were lavishly decorated with Italian Renaissance art.
Plus, the transformative impact of the printed word and Bible translation that can't be overstated.
Absolutely crucial for spreading knowledge and ideas.
It sounds like an incredibly vibrant period for French literature, spanning from earlier traditions like troubadour songs all the way to the epic satirical works of Rabelais.
A huge range, yeah.
But the political landscape under François was far from tranquil. France striving to become a major European power, frequently clashing with Emperor Charles V.
Yes. François III's ambition to elevate France's international standing led to extensive and costly warfare, particularly over control of the Duchy of Milan.
And his alliance with the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman, that was a significant, maybe controversial move.
Very controversial at the time, yes. A major diplomatic realignment. However, he suffered a devastating defeat and was captured at the Battle of Pavia in 1525.
Captured, wow.
Yes, it forced him to accept humiliating terms for peace.
And the territorial rivalry with the Habsburgs continued under his successors, who also got entangled in the Reformation upheavals. Then came the French Wars of Religion against the Protestant Huguenots. That must have severely strained the kingdom's resources.
Absolutely drained them. Under François II and Charles IX, France was deeply divided, fractured by civil war. This was fueled by resentment among powerful Protestant nobles and Catherine de' Medici's attempts to maintain peace through, well, often precarious compromises.
The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, a particularly horrific episode.
Truly terrible. And the ongoing conflict with Spain only made France's financial situation worse. Plus, issues surrounding royal succession after Charles IX's death further complicated an already volatile situation.
Which leads us directly into the Reformation and those deeply divisive religious wars. The history notes the Peace of Cateau-Cambrésis in 1559 ended the Habsburg-Valois Wars, but then France and the Habsburg Netherlands got embroiled in their own internal religious conflicts.
Exactly. The focus shifted inwards. The religious policies of Francis I and Henry II, while aimed at suppressing Protestantism, ultimately failed to prevent its growth, particularly Calvinism, which found many adherents among the nobility after the mid-1530s.
Right.
So the first of the French Wars of Religion erupted in April 1562, after Henry II's death. It was significantly worsened by power struggles among prominent noble families, the Catholic Guises versus the Protestant Bourbons, all vying for influence over his young sons, François II and Charles IX.
And Catherine de' Medici trying to keep the peace, but failing.
Yes, her attempts at religious compromise didn't work out.
So it was essentially a three-sided struggle. The Catholic monarchy and the Guise family against the Protestant Huguenots led by figures like Gaspard de Coligny.
Precisely. The early death of François II led to the regency of his mother, Catherine de' Medici, who faced immense challenges navigating these complex factional rivalries. Coligny emerged as a key military leader for the Huguenot cause. The history details how Protestantism first took root in France in the 1520s, partly through people returning from Geneva, the Calvinist center, and also involving disillusioned individuals from Jewish backgrounds and refugees fleeing the Spanish Inquisition.
It sounds like the movement gained considerable traction under Francis I, but faced intense persecution from the Sorbonne and the king himself.
Very strong persecution, yes.
And Henry II really escalated things, trying to exterminate Protestantism with propaganda, executions, even educational reform.
Yes. Systematic efforts, anti-Huguenot pamphlets, public executions as a deterrent, reforming education to instill anti-Protestant sentiment.
But despite all that, the movement continued to grow underground.
It did, and Henry II's sudden death in 1559 just intensified the religious tension, leading reformers to seek alliances with German Protestant princes to strengthen their position.
The history mentions the eventual failure of the Edict of Nantes, signed later, revoked in 1685, to establish lasting religious peace. Why did it ultimately fail?
It suggests both internal and external factors. Things like the Peace of Rouen, later attempts by Louis XVI to improve Protestant treatment, followed by renewed persecution. Plus, the emergence of Jansenist congregations within Catholicism added another layer of complexity.
Right.
The significant Protestant presence in 17th century Paris also posed unique challenges for the monarchy. They could potentially be used as a counterbalance, but their strict Calvinist morality was often seen as a provocation by the nobility. Furthermore, some powerful nobles apparently abused pre-edict provisions for mutual protection, forming what were essentially private pacts or armies that could challenge the sovereign.
And Philip II of Spain was actively preparing for war against French Protestants around 1559.
Yes, adding external pressure and contributing to the 2 decades of increasing Protestant power and the broader societal upheaval, sometimes called the bourgeois revolution.
All this intense religious conflict eventually gives way to the age of absolutism. But the history argues that the crown's power wasn't easily achieved. Powerful nobles like the Guise family still controlled huge territories in the mid-16th century.
Exactly. These powerful families often formed their own national leagues, complete with armies, leading to significant decentralized power. While the king might control Paris strategically, many provinces were effectively governed independently by nobles of different faiths and cultures. However, the wealthier parts of France were seeing increasing urbanization and professionalization, gradually shifting power dynamics between landholders and workforces.
The history even contends that France, by late 17th century standards, wasn't yet a fully modern state. Sparsely populated compared to England or Spain, collecting comparable taxes only later.
Yeah, that's an interesting point it makes. And Paris is portrayed as complex, luxurious, and squalid, a logistical challenge full of rival groups.
It's into this context that Louis XIV, the Sun King, is born in 1638. King at 4, mother as regent.
Yes, son of Louis XIII and Anne of Austria. He gained an early understanding of government, apparently disliked Cardinal Mazarin's control during his minority, and eventually took full control in 1651.
Famously believing in absolute monarchy. L'État, c'est moi, I am the state, and his reign was incredibly long, 72 years.
Remarkable duration. He orchestrated the arrest of key Frondeurs nobles rebelling against Mazarin in 1650, ruled with Mazarin until 61. Then at 22, he declared he'd rule alone, appointing brilliant ministers like Colbert.
He even tried to seize the Spanish Netherlands in 1667, War of Devolution.
He did, resulting in only minor territorial gains, though. He held a recognized, if uneasy, position as a German emperor, interacting with the Holy Roman Emperor and Pascal at Versailles.
And heavily involved in religious matters, coordinating the French church's response, pensioning bishops.
Deeply involved.
Yeah.
But the rise of Jansenism caused a major schism because of Louis's strong pro-papal stance. This ultimately led to that harsh persecution and forced conversion of the Huguenots, largely orchestrated by ex-Jansenists, causing a huge exodus of French Protestants by 1709.
A significant brain drain, presumably. And Louis XIV's death in 1715 marked the end of a major era. The history also discusses the elaborate court etiquette that developed. Sounds incredibly detailed.
Oh, absolutely central to his reign. The strict rules elevated the king, created social distance, regulated access through courtiers, all based on rank. France became the center of European court etiquette. The French king adopted key elements of sovereignty, reinforcing that hierarchical structure and the idea of unequal treatment based on birth.
So etiquette was a complex system of reciprocities linked to rank, requiring knowledge of discreet behavior, wit, a constant performance.
Precisely. A performance of power and status.
And from that very rigid structure, we move to the dramatic, transformative French Revolution. The history calls it pivotal, emerging from Louis XIV's shadow, but inheriting problems that worsened under Louis XV and broke under Louis XVI.
Yes, Louis XV's free spending court, dissenting colonies.
Yeah.
These created huge financial difficulties. Then Louis VI's aid to the American colonial revolt strained the treasury even further. And the deeply unequal social structure of the three estates, with the third estate bearing almost all the taxes, was the fundamental underlying cause.
Those long, simmering grievances finally erupted in 1789. The Estates General convened, clashed over voting, the tennis court oath, and then the iconic storming of the Bastille on July 14th.
That moment, July 14th, symbolically marked the shift from feudalism towards a constitutional monarchy. Then came the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, a foundational document. But the revolution radicalized, especially after King Louis XIV's failed attempt to flee. That led to the Republic being established and the executions of Louis and Marie Antoinette in 1793.
Then came wars against Austria and Prussia, military disasters, the horrific September massacres in Paris, invasion by neighboring monarchies trying to restore the old order, civil war in the Vendée.
And by 1793, war declared by nearly all major European monarchies. A whirlwind of conflict.
Followed by the Reign of Terror under the Committee of Public Safety, mass executions, de-Christianization policies.
A brutal period. These extremes alienated many, leading eventually to Robespierre's fall in 1794 and the Thermidorian reaction. But that didn't bring stability either. The corrupt Directory took over, only to be overthrown by Napoleon Bonaparte's coup in 1799.
The history digs into the causes, the Paris versus rest of France dynamic, population growth, migration to Paris accentuating wealth disparities.
Right, the stark contrast between Parisian affluence and the poverty of the urban poor, plus rising food prices, especially bread horn. Michelet blamed the old regime's incompetence for that.
And the Enlightenment questioning the church and nobility, plus the strain of constant wars with Britain.
All major factors contributing to the pressure cooker atmosphere.
Despite the violence, the revolution achieved significant things. Abolishing monarchy and noble privileges, establishing human rights, liberty, equality, fraternity.
Yes, abolition of feudal duties, end of tithes, formal equality under law, liberation from religious conservatism. Though the reign of terror under Robespierre remains a dark chapter.
And instability continued after Robespierre, with Napoleon's ambitions leading to more wars, coalitions against France, the disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812, and his eventual exile to Elba in 1815.
The history reminds us of the initial attempt at constitutional monarchy, Louis VI as King of the French, and the revolt in Paris on July 14th after he proposed dissolving the Assembly. Different interpretations of his actions, too.
It makes an interesting point about the guillotine's use stopping in Paris, while Louis VI was executed just outside, and argues the revolution crumbled against a concerted plan, with his execution's memory suppressed later.
The accusations against Louis focused on anti-revolution activities, flight to Varennes being key. His trial for high treason by the convention aimed at restoring the Bourbon monarchy. The history points out the Constitution was ignored, arguing he should have been indicted as a traitor for violating his oath, making his kingship illegitimate once the Constitution fell.
So his legal deposition in 1792 made him just citizen Louis, unworthy of protection, tried as a normal citizen, ending the idea of the king personified.
Precisely. A fundamental shift in the concept of sovereignty.
Which then sets the stage for the Napoleonic era. Bonaparte's coup in 1799 forced the Directory out. He took dictatorial powers as first consul under a new constitution with a consultative legislature.
Yes, and the history highlights how he maintained power through a balance elements of liberty alongside despotism. He recognized popular participation had outlasted the fear of the terror. The two assassination attempts on him by December 1800 led to executions, but also the creation of a modern police apparatus.
It mentions he restored aspects of culture in the church, but interestingly, elementary education and literacy actually declined under him.
Yeah, that's a counterintuitive point.
Yeah.
And economic growth led to more social stratification, a new bureaucratic elite.
Grandeur took Roman forms. Celebrations focused on political allegiance. Romanticism rises with Chateaubriand, and artistic bourgeoisie emerges. But French historians uncritically accepted Napoleonic propaganda.
Apparently so, portraying him as the sole creator of France's greatness. The history paints a picture of despotism replacing anarchy, but with its own French machinations, while ultra-conservatism controlled the press. Napoleon watched plots against him fail.
Napoleon himself, born Corsica 1769, French military education, rapid rise during the Revolution, early success reconquering Nice from Austria.
Britain was reluctant to engage him directly on land, ceding control of the Mediterranean, Italy, Egypt.
His Egyptian campaign in 98 occupied Alexandria, Cairo, but the British blockade and Nelson sinking most of the French fleet was a major blow.
Huge blow. He returned to France in 99 with half his army, just as dissatisfaction with the Directory peaked. The Council of Ancients let him arrest the directors.
Then he took absolute authority, changing the constitution to the consulate, taking high privileges. His political measures stabilized France and the continent. The Concordat with the papacy, judicial reform.
Yes, the Concordat recognized ties, but removed the clerical monopoly on education. He arrested Girondins, suppressed revolutionary movements, created new states against the Pope, suppressed royalist efforts.
The history emphasizes he seized power in that 99 coup unchallenged, despite Sieyès' initial intentions, dealt with surviving Directory members with calm dissolution or austere exile.
His restoration of the Catholic religion largely resumed the 1790 dioceses. The Pope was the one really wanting a close relationship. Interestingly, the Revolutionary Code Civil was only half Bonapartist, heavily influenced by Roman law.
The history argues the Napoleonic settlement wasn't the restoration expected. Bourgeois capitalism grew alongside continued inequality. The core contradiction. Safety versus liberty, driving his quest for a European empire.
Exactly. And the revolutionary and Napoleonic periods had an immense influence across Europe, awakening national consciousness, inspiring nationalist literature, improving transport and communication. But also brutal repression in Spain, Germany, cultural insensitivity. Administrative and legal measures froze some revolutionary aspects into law, unsettling returning nobles.
So the reforming ideals fell into disrepute, poisoning constitutionalism, yet his methods of suppressing discontent were admired and copied elsewhere.
Yes, by Spain, Austria, Russia. The history suggests conditions for later social revolutions seemed missing in France due to the Republic Empire's power monopoly. And exporting the revolution paradoxically hastened its fall as the consulate's forms, produced against internal pressures, led to the rigid formalism of imperial France.
And after Napoleon's fall, we have the Restoration and the July Monarchy. Louis XIII, 1814-1824, maintaining a royalist monarchy, Bourbon rule.
Yes, the history notes the three forms of address used for him: his docility to good sense, lessons of past glory. Napoleon's return from Elba in Feb 1815 left Louis XIII without support. He died in 1724, succeeded by his brother Charles X.
Charles X sounds more hardline imprisoned, offending deputies, tried to betroth Louis Philippe, Duc d'Orléans, with his daughter.
And Louis Philippe, as hinted, Cyrus Newley of 1830, later rose to power after Charles X's exile declaration following the July Revolution.
The Bourbons return in 1814, ruling a France they'd governed arbitrarily 23 years prior. Louis VIII's coronation in Reims lacked the grand nobles who'd fled.
Right. The history touches on Louis XVI's family's fate. Louis VIII found little relic of royal grandeur except the children of Bourbons in Orléans. The name Louis itself was potent, even banned in places.
Aware of past peril, he lamented the 20 years of Bourbon absence, made promises like Louis VI's, decreed not to exalt authority or seek revenge, but take measures against those who detested nobility, church, Bourbons.
Paris, in winter 1829-30, is described as lethargic, but with unrest. King Charles X tried resolving the budget deficit, a Bonapartist legacy.
Agitation caused by Louis Philippe's efforts protecting financial capitalists in July 1830, even as materialists listed grievances.
Yes. Visually magnificent Paris seemed to overturn the political spectrum. The history argues that while 1789 set the stage for protest, 1793 and its aftermath produced a society unforgivable to many. Later generations grew disillusioned, recreated earlier facades, sought education elsewhere.
Leading us to the Second Republic and Empire. Second Republic proclaimed February 25, 1848, parliamentary democracy, but short-lived.
Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, elected president, Decas 1848, coup d'état, Dec 1851, Second Empire declared 1852 with him as Emperor Napoleon III.
Paris, preoccupied with expansion, technology, empire, economic anxieties. Reconstruction in the 1850s, Exposition Universelle of 1855, glorifying ancient Greek heroes.
Louis Napoleon Bonaparte unexpectedly monopolized public life, capitalizing on the astonishment after 1848. Regal arrival, his name opened doors.
Described as the incarnation of mystification, apostle to some, shocking degradation of royalty to others, understood people's expectations, used grand language, symbols.
Designed the son of the great Napoleon legend, presented theatrically, a Bonapartist myth at the end of the Republican tradition.
Meanwhile, Louis Philippe fled to England February 24, 1848. Duplicitous republic establishment with governments at Hôtel de Ville and Palais Bourbon. Initial uncertainty, then shock at the Republic's proclamation.
But support for liberal and social reform in Paris, wave of new legislation, national workshops for unemployed, restricted working hours. Lamartine, moderate Republican leader, crucial through energy and eloquence.
Unavoidable missteps followed. Need to explain moderation policy. Extraordinary excitement around the December 20th, 1848 presidential election. Fear of invasion by overjoyed supporters when Louis Napoleon Bonaparte's victory announced.
Crowds at Palais de l'Assemblée shouted, "Long live the Emperor!" He made remarkable changes, needed to overcome the previous constitution. Expectation of 2-year intervals for elections, universal male suffrage over 21.
Apparent disregard for popular feelings in condensing government powers, but clever dealings with compatriots. Feared the assembly as a check, wanted to disown radical factions.
Fines on deputies, newspapers in Paris had little effect. Dictatorial testimony before assembly, limited success establishing drug manufacturing monopoly. Proclamation of empire met with noisy excitement, prohibition of bald eagle parades, hope past upheavals forgotten, country would prosper. Celebrations in Metz, Strasbourg.
Moving to the Third Republic, formally established Feb 4, 1871. Presidents, senators met Feb 26 to commemorate Sedan victory.
A rather ironic commemoration. Yes, given the circumstances of its founding after that defeat. New Republic's Assembly met March 1st, elections March 8, rapidly establishing the Constitution. Assembly situated at Versailles, place of historical, monarchical importance.
Its political nature temporary, intended for electing another body outside Versailles' monarchist conservatism. 950 members, representing 30 million people, met March 12, declared king dethroned, entrusted executive powers to Bishop of Orleans.
The first Republican Constitution was actually signed 1852, Second Republic. Election of figure with 40 million votes, discontent, subsequent indictment, marriage to wealthy heiress whose millions rebuilt Notre Dame, Palais de Louis XIV.
Grumbling mood at Versailles Convention, questioning if working classes would remain jealous of better's political success. Then it circles back again. Genesis of modern France in Charles the Bald's kingdom, disorder, fiefs after Charlemagne.
Anarchy of 9th-10th centuries, raids, massacres. New Capet elected king 987 after debate, favored by vassals, pilgrimage, archbishop's approval, initial limited power, determined to free crown from vassalage, support from military leaders.
Lengthy negotiations needed. Lords interpreted his election as triumph over rebellious barons. Two major problems again. Recovering territories, creating effective central government.
Right. Fast forward again. Significant territorial economic advances between Franco-Prussian War and WWI, particularly in Africa. Algiers control, Tunisia annexation, West African areas, Moroccan protectorates, Madagascar.
Colonization in French West Africa, French settlements, trade monopoly, railway construction, colonial administration with taxes, forced labor. Saharan colonization and economic failure despite conquest.
French defeat by China and Asia, but acquired Annan Protectorate, firm control over Tonkin, northern Vietnam, from 1906. Hanoi Yunnan Railroad, French protection of Yunnan commerce. Indochina economically productive. Plantations, wealth commerce. Conflicting French, British, U.S. interests in China.
French colonial regime described as inspired by tutelage, involving oppression accepted stoically. Subjugated people regarded as French wards due to perceived French superiority.
A deeply problematic justification looking back.
Then the devastating world wars. After the Austro-Hungarian heir's assassination, Paris atmosphere, excitement and dread of war against Germany, alliances, honor, revenge, glory fueling it.
Rush to enlist, women's marches, patriotic displays. Government paralyzed initially, press kept activity alive until Joffre routed the German offensive. A year later, despair among mothers, wives waiting for news from trenches.
Collective consciousness formed around Joffre's map. France pleaded to churches for armaments, courage after Verdun, symbolic return of Roland Napoleon. Years spent probing Senegalese soldiers, unleashing dogs of war, turning course at Vimy.
Sentiment. No German would again set foot on French soil. Completeness of victory led to calls to march on Berlin. Impossible due to German retreat to Hindenburg Line. Lost sea control to British. Enemy espionage.
Horrific losses at Verdun. 100,000 rifles worth one soldier. Plundering in Orient, air attacks, indirect engagement of Quimper, Rouen, extensive telephone wire laid, changed general staff tactics led to crash on the mats at Compiègne. Arrival of British Colbert marked war's end, but foreshadowed future defeat.
The history offers that unconventional view of the French Empire and WWI, resounding political, military, economic success often unacknowledged. Just outer world of unarmed French pluralist imperialists. Small but wise like the fox.
Quite a freeze.
1895-1914 is French Empire's high-tide transformative influence overseas, surprising assimilation of young colonial nations as French Africanists, prefiguration of UN ideals, supported by modern engineering.
French Pauls and Franks throughout enlarged empire, larger than metropolitan France after 1911. Return of French architects, builders, distant observation of final constructions with frustration. Plastic empire withstood threats, triumphs shifted feelings to mellower acceptance of its foreign nature.
This invisible, enormous, best-kept heritage brand profoundly changed France and Europe, the source argues. Then WWII looms. Well-prepared French army, spring 1938, but misdeployed Sep 1939, leading to confusion.
Line drawn by May 10, 1940. Delayed counteroffensive order, halted units, misdirected armored division, thin holding of front despite 7th Army's advance, swift, determined retreat. Roads blocked by fleeing civilians, years of discontent surfaced.
Armistice terms to General Hunsinger, June 17th, dividing France into occupied and free zones. De Gaulle's historic broadcast, June 23, 1940 war. Victory but lonely voice against those voting for deliverance.
Vichy under Marshal Pétain. Unquestioned heir of ancient sovereignty, increased powers from defeat, not war. Symbolically preserving morality, traditions via cooperation with ancient foe. Promised exclusion of others from peaceful Europe. But France only, mistress in her phraseology, remained in chains.
A bleak assessment.
Shifting to post-war France. Critical juncture after WWII, weakened position, specter of communism amidst modernization attempts, diminishing but still valued colonial empire.
Rebellion outbreak in Algeria, Nolgiat 1954, confronted government with questions. Global responsibility, maintaining colonies, arguments for civilizing mission versus high cost, blood of empire, relevance of prestige if achieved through bloodshed.
Conflict between humanitarian ideals and public government, plea for firm measures against independence movements. Fourth Republic structure, parliamentary, proportional representation, more power to smaller parties, fragmented legislature, numerous potential coalitions.
Lack of vote of confidence use, concurrent ministerial agendas, instability, frequent changes, nominal power and minister vessels, not affairs, due to overlapping portfolios. Army operated without civilian control, incapable of dealing with conflict, politicized industrial output, adding to confusion.
France devastated post-WWII, bombed cities, shortages, damaged infrastructure, ruined German-controlled factories producing nothing for 4 years, large population exiled, need for strictly productive recovery.
Long, deep economic crisis, output decline, post-war recovery amid gradual settlement of banks, enterprises. Monetary authorities focused on lasting currency regime due to past inflations. Currency reform, restructuring public assets, bank reorganization.
Boost to output from large public investments, rapid catching up with other major Western countries. Remarkable vineyard replanting aided wine recovery, role of management, technical returns to scale. French supply system needed expansion until mid-60s. Limited product lines, basic tech, existing know-how.
France able to sketch national prices encompassing demand-driven needs, selectively provide public goods. Post-WWII, projection of prosperity, growth of establishment in France, East European satellites, large housing projects, care appliance diffusion, extended social networks driven by mass consumerism, mass culture.
Crisis in this modern society construction late 1960s, triggered by oil shocks exposing corporate economic policy problems, recession, unemployment, dismantling mass production, political climate, frustration, social protest movements across Europe, anti-war, student workers' unrest, anti-colonial fights, rise of socialist presidential candidate in France promising renewal.
Socialist Party aimed to fight inequalities via national control of industrial production, banks. Supported by classical liberal economic thought.
A complex period of change.
Very much so.
Finally, we come to contemporary France. Terrorism remains a significant concern, tragically highlighted by the November 2015 Paris attacks, deadliest since WWII.
Yes, and the 2016 Nice attack, hijacked airliner, 2017 mosque shooting in Villejuif underscore the continued threat. We've also seen the rise of the Front National under Marine Le Pen, narrowing the political divide. The 2017 presidential election was notably between two female candidates in the final round, though Le Pen faced Macron.
Ultimately, Emmanuel Macron, a 39-year-old liberal centrist, elected president May 2017. His party gained majority in National Assembly, gains in Senate, reflected disillusionment with traditional parties, also youth protests against discrimination, immigration, concerns about desecularization due to Islam.
Macron's administration shifted on issues. Headscarves banned debate, breaking up suburbs. Some progress abandoned after nationwide protests in 2018 over fuel taxes. Long-held vision of state-allied public balancing tradition, perpetual burdens persists.
French political landscape at a critical juncture as Fifth Republic nears 75th anniversary. Continuous electoral political crises. Rise of far-right as permanent player. Presidential party lost legislative majority June 2022 after claiming both presidency parliamentary dominance just 2 years prior.
Loss interpreted mirroring decline of left-wing groupings 20 years earlier, but key difference. Macron retained presidency. Extreme right appears destined to become primary political force. Raises questions. High political disengagement despite National Assembly as battleground. Difficulty classifying opponents. Validity of existing frameworks.
Were recent events short-term shocks? Increasing difficulty relying on thesis of fracture. Suggests examining continuities. France's cultural identity. Ancient, cohesive, complex. French-speaking majorities, significant minorities. Pride in language, culture despite changes from colonization, decolonization, immigration.
Less than half population spoke French at Revolution time. Development, enforcement of standard French by mid-19th century. Fifth Republic occasionally hostile to immigration, but state strongly believes in homogenization for stability equality. French language of key institutions.
State tolerates but intends phasing out dialect varieties. Centralized, publicly funded, almost universal education system. Importance of education, culture to French people, occasional resistance to homogenizing control. Coexistence of standardization, centralization with local folklore, diversity, resistance to state foreign force.
Preservation of cultural identity through particular socialism, state capitalism. Germany's post-WWII restructuring, 1990 reunification, answered de Tocqueville's question about continent's future. Continued pooling of French-German sovereignty, but questions raised by 2002 French elections, rejection of European constitution about future cooperation.
France, Germany central to EU success, founding countries, big savers. Changes in coordination impact European integration. France past striving for key EU role, later concerns about Euro area future after bailouts, financial aid, differing national preferences on funding, tax, spending based on socioeconomic structure, skepticism towards Eurobonds.
Countries' perceptions of how new situations influence political economic power within Euro area important. Germany's strong opposition to Euro area dignifying options. Implications of differing national preferences on monetary union's future. Key policy agreements left to heads of state government or finance ministers.
EU came into being 1993 Maastricht Treaty, originated from European communities of 1950s, France founding member. Promote economic unity after WWII. France sought to restore power, prevent future conflicts. Needed U.S. funding, Marshall Plan. French foreign minister proposed pooling coal steel production under common high authority to prevent war with Germany.
Organization of European Economic Cooperation established July 1950. Treaty of Paris signed April 1951, creating European Coal and Steel Community, ECSC, with institutions. ECSC role in European unity, but mistrust of high authority by member states' governance led French government to seek alternative institutions.
Treaty establishing European Defense Community, EDC, signed Paris, May 1952. Aimed for common army, foreign minister. Hope European unification leads to reconciliation. French National Assembly rejected EDC ratification, August 1954. Major setback for EU, deprived European Commission of defense applications.
Possibility of firm unified Europe at new millennium, altering European politics, placing France in new paradigm under Jacques Chirac. Germany's emergence as preeminent power after reunification seemingly displaced France. Chirac's concerns about post-Mitterrand Europe. France's pressured leadership in Europe. Euro-Atlantic alliance.
France's geostrategic reorientation. Bridge two Europes, le tête de pont. Secure bid as pole in multipolar world. Sauver l'honneur. Vision of tripolar world, US, China, emergent Europe, by end 20th century. EU, potential to balance superpowers if integrates powerful European states, withstands American unilateralism.
Potential quandary. Rivalry between old emergent EU members, untrustworthiness of UK, necessitated new balance of power through new geostrategy of firm united Europe. Emergence of new Gaullism European.
A vision that continues to shape France's approach. Absolutely. Understanding history, especially now, is so crucial. France, roots back over 1,000 years to Hugh Capet, crowned 987, offers so many lessons.
Consolidation of French identity by 1337 during Hundred Years' War, enduring influence of figures like Joan of Arc, subsequent reigns of monarchs until the Revolution of 1789. It's such a rich tapestry.
Napoleon's reshaping of the country early 19th century, lasting impact of his institutions, undeniable, and we have to acknowledge the grievous suffering last century. World wars, occupations, painful decolonization, near Revolution 68, rise of far right more recently.
Yeah, a lot packed into just the last 100 years or so.
Ultimately, awareness of past events, those recurring patterns, can indeed help us understand the present, maybe mitigate or avert future crises. France has long held a global attraction, demonstrated historical, political, intellectual vitality well before its fame in art and philosophy.
It's interesting to briefly contrast it, as the source implicitly does, with older civilizations like Mesopotamia, Egypt known for different achievements. The significance of de Gaulle's speech at the liberation of Paris, 1944, stands out, a high point, followed by what some might see as a decline from that eminence, marking a broader global turning point, perhaps.
So for you, the listener, here's a final thought to consider. Throughout this deep dive, we've seen recurring themes: that enduring search for freedom and justice, the persistent dangers of hubris, the complex, shifting landscape of morality. How might these insights from France's long, eventful past inform our understanding of the very significant global challenges we face right now in our contemporary world?
Something to really think about.
Thanks for diving deep with us.